Claire stood in the doorway of apartment 4B, the keys still warm in her hand from the building manager's grip. The place smelled faintly of old wood and faintly sweet, like dust had settled and refused to leave. She stepped inside, her sneakers squeaking on the worn hardwood floor. Her roommate, Dana, was kneeling by the hallway, shoving the last of her clothes into an oversized duffel. "You're sure you're good here alone?" Dana asked without looking up. I shrug. "I'll be fine. It's just an apartment." "Yeah, but it's an old apartment, and the top floor gets all the weird noises." Dana's tone was light, but there was something underneath, the same something that had made her insist she leave before nightfall. Claire leaned against the doorframe. "Weird noises I can handle. It's noisy neighbors I can't stand." Dana zipped her bag and stood, brushing off her knees. "Well, you're not going to have those. Mrs. Ellis downstairs is basically death, and the guy across the hall works nights. But..." She hesitated. "You ever notice how it's really quiet here? Like, too quiet?" Claire raised an eyebrow. "What's too quiet supposed to sound like?" Dana only smiled tightly and hoisted her bag over her shoulder. "You'll see." By the time the sun dipped below the row of brick buildings outside, the apartment had settled into that heavy, still silence Dana had mentioned. Claire unpacked slowly, her Spotify playlist filling the air just enough to make her forget the emptiness. When she passed her bedroom door, she noticed the vent above the bed for the first time. It was small, maybe a foot square, with a faded white metal cover and slats angled down toward the bed. The paint was chipped at the edges, and something about it felt off. Too old to be part of the central air system. She shook it off. By midnight, she was lying in bed, phone in hand, scrolling through meaningless updates. That was when she heard it. At first, it was soft. A papery rustle. Not a steady hum like a fan, not the whoosh of air. It had rhythm. Shh, shh, shh. Claire froze, thumb hovering over her screen. The noise came again, faint but deliberate. She sat up, craning her neck toward the vent. The slats stared back, dark and still. The sound stopped. She let out the breath she'd been holding, forcing a laugh at herself. "Probably just air pressure," she muttered, lying back down. Then, clear as if someone had leaned right against the vent, a voice whispered, "Claire, are you still awake?" Her heart leapt into her throat. She sat up bolt upright, staring at the vent. "Who's there?" Her voice was sharper than she meant it to be. Silence. She grabbed her phone and turned on the flashlight, pointing it at the vent. The beam caught dust on the slats, but behind them, nothing but blackness. She lowered the light slowly, telling herself she'd imagined it. Maybe the building pipes carried sound from somewhere else. But she didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Every time she closed her eyes, she swore she could hear that faint shh, shh, shh. Again, as though someone in the dark was brushing their fingers along paper, waiting for her to listen. By morning, she had almost convinced herself it hadn't happened. Almost. The morning light came through thin and gray, as if the sun had been watered down. Claire sat at the small kitchen table, sipping burnt coffee from a chipped mug, scrolling her phone in search of distraction. She didn't want to think about the whisper. She wanted it filed away as a half-dream, the kind that evaporates when you try to remember it. But the memory of her own name, breathed from inside the wall, clung to her like static. Her phone buzzed. A text from Dana. "Made it to Mom's. Did you sleep?" She typed back, "Not much. You didn't tell me the vent talks." The typing bubble appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "Don't joke like that." "I'm serious." This time the reply took longer. "You're imagining it. Just keep your music on at night. It helps with the quiet." Claire frowned at the phone. Dana had never been evasive before, not with her. By midday, she was unpacking boxes in the living room, half watching the street below. The building across the road had laundry lines strung between fire escapes, shirts swaying lazily in the heat. A man in a dark coat, far too heavy for the weather, stood on the opposite sidewalk, looking up at her building. When her eyes met his through the glass, he smiled. Not a friendly smile, but slow, thin, and deliberate, before walking away. That night, she decided she wouldn't give the vent the satisfaction of her attention. She left her phone playing a podcast on low volume, set her pillow so she wasn't directly under the slats, and forced her breathing into the steady rhythm of sleep. She was just on the edge of drifting when the rustle started again. Shh. 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 Her hand twitched toward her phone, but she stayed still. Then the voice came, softer this time, as though trying not to wake her. "I like it when you're quiet." Claire's eyes snapped open, but she didn't move. "You're a good listener." The words came with a faint, almost wet sound, like someone's lips barely parting. She could picture them inches away on the other side of the vent. Her phone's podcast kept playing, but the voice didn't seem to notice. Or maybe it didn't care. She finally sat up, yanked the earphones out of her ears, and whispered, "Who are you?" Silence. But the shh, shh, shh went on. Slower now, like the sound of someone dragging their fingertips along the inside of the wall. The next morning, Claire decided she'd had enough of lying awake, waiting for the whisper. She dragged the old wooden step stool from the kitchen and set it beneath the vent. Standing on tiptoe, she peered through the slats. Dust, darkness, the stale smell of metal, and something faintly sweet. Not perfume, not food, just the wrong kind of sweet, like fruit gone just past ripe. She knocked gently on the metal. Hollow. Curiosity rising, she fetched a butter knife from the kitchen and loosened one of the screws. It resisted, paint flaking as she turned. Finally, the cover came loose in her hand. The space behind the vent was not a duct. No sheet metal, no pipes. Just an empty cavity, maybe 2 feet deep, framed by rough wood. She shone her phone's flashlight inside. The beam lit up more dust and something glinting faintly in the far corner. She stretched her arm in but couldn't quite reach. The stool wobbled under her weight and she cursed softly, pulling back. She'd have to get a chair later. That afternoon, she bumped into Mrs. Ellis from downstairs in the laundry room. The old woman wore a floral housecoat and a pair of giant pearl earrings that swayed when she moved. "Settling in all right?" Mrs. Ellis asked, folding a towel with slow, careful hands. "Yeah," Claire said. "Place is quiet." The old woman's smile thinned. "It's an old building. Holds sounds in strange ways." About that, Claire said, trying for casual. Do you ever hear things? Like voices? Through the vents? Mrs. Ellis stopped folding. Her gaze lingered on Claire's face a little too long. No, dear. My apartment doesn't have vents. Claire blinked. It doesn't? Never has. These buildings weren't built with central air, just windows and radiators. Whatever you've got in your walls isn't from the building plans. That night, Claire lay in bed staring at the open vent. She hadn't replaced the cover. She wanted to see if the voice would still come. At midnight, the rustle started again. Then the voice came, softer this time, as though trying not to wake her. You took the cover off. Her mouth grew dry. I wanted to see you. A pause. I'm not ready yet. She swallowed. Ready for what? For you to let me out. The voice was lower now, almost tender. When she looked again at the vent, she thought, just for a second, that the darkness inside had shifted, like something leaning back deeper into the cavity. The following afternoon, Claire brought in a chair from the dining table, set it beneath the vent, and climbed up with a flashlight in one hand. She'd been thinking about that faint glint all morning, unable to shake the image of something metallic buried in the dust. With her free arm, she reached in as far as she could, her fingertips brushing against the rough wood at the back. The cavity was colder than she expected, the air inside still and stale. Her hand grazed something small and hard. She stretched her fingers around it and pulled. It came free with a faint scrape, and she drew it into the light. It was a ring. A woman's ring, tarnished silver with a thin, twisting band. The stone was cloudy, almost opaque, and as she turned it over, she noticed something. Tiny initials etched inside the band. E.M. She turned the ring in her fingers, the metal warm now from her skin. It didn't look especially valuable, but something about the wear on it suggested it had been loved or worn for a very long time. That night, she left the ring on her nightstand beside the lamp. She told herself she wouldn't put it on. She didn't even know where it had come from, but her eyes kept drifting to it as she lay in bed. The rustle in the vent started later than usual, closer to 1 a.m. You found it. Her heart jumped. The ring? It was mine. Claire swallowed. Who are you? I had a name once. You wouldn't like it. The voice was calm, steady, almost conversational. Why was it in my wall? Because I didn't need it anymore. The words slid into the room like something cold under a door. She pulled the blankets up, feeling the skin on her arms tighten. There was a long silence, then the voice said, "Put it on. Just once." She didn't. But when she woke in the morning, the ring was no longer on the nightstand. It was on her finger. Claire sat up in bed, the early light turning the room a pale, cold blue. The ring was snug on her right hand, the cloudy stone catching the light in a dull shiver. She didn't remember putting it on. She knew she hadn't put it on. Her first instinct was to pull it off. She gripped it with her left hand and tugged. It slid part way, then caught at the knuckle. She twisted harder, the metal biting into her skin, but it refused to move further. "Come on," she muttered through clenched teeth. She tried soap in the bathroom sink, then lotion, but the band felt tighter the more she struggled. When she stopped to catch her breath, she noticed the faintest discoloration under the ring. Not a rash, not bruising, but something paler, almost like the skin beneath hadn't seen light in years. She decided to take it to a jeweler, the one on the corner, an old man with a magnifying loupe permanently dangling around his neck, peered at the ring under the light. "Strange cut," he murmured. "Old work. I'd say late 19th century." Claire shifted in her seat. "Can you cut it off?" He frowned. "We could, but it's not stuck. You just need to relax the hand. If you don't want it anymore, I can take it for scrap value." "No," she said too quickly, surprising herself. When she left, the ring felt heavier. That night, she slept with her hand under the pillow, as if keeping the ring out of sight might keep the whisper from noticing. It didn't work. "It suits you." She opened her eyes in the dark. The voice was warmer now, almost approving. "I want to give it back." "You already did. You're just holding it for me until I'm ready." Her skin prickled, and she turned her face into the pillow. "Ready for what?" The rustle came again, closer than before, like fingertips tracing the edge of the wall. "For you to come inside." The next day, the air in the apartment felt wrong, not just still, heavy, as if the walls themselves were holding in a breath. Claire sat at her desk trying to work, but the vent seemed louder now. Even in daylight, she could hear faint ticks and shifts from within, like wood contracting, or someone shifting their weight slowly. She found herself glancing at it every few minutes. It hadn't been replaced since she removed the cover. The black rectangle gaped above her bed, swallowing light.
It was a man in faded jeans and a work shirt with a stitched patch. Thomas, maintenance. His hair was graying, his eyes bloodshot in a way that suggested long nights. "Building manager said you called about a vent?" he asked, stepping inside without waiting for an answer. Yeah, she said, leading him to the bedroom. "It doesn't connect to anything, but it's making noises." Thomas studied the opening without stepping too close. "Not a vent. Old buildings like this, sometimes you get voids between walls, places workers sealed up instead of tearing down." "What's inside?" He shrugged. "Dust, maybe rats." "I heard a voice." That made him pause. His eyes flicked to hers. "Voice?" "Yeah, whispering." His gaze lingered on the dark cavity. Then he stepped back. "If you hearing voices, maybe you've got a neighbor with access to the walls, but that space doesn't connect to another apartment. So where does it go?" Thomas picked up his tool bag. "Nowhere you want to be." That night, Claire pushed her bed further from the wall. The vent still yawned above empty air, but at least it wasn't directly over her face anymore. Still, the whisper found her. "You moved the bed." She froze. "Can you see me?" "I can feel you. When you're close, the air tastes different." Her pulse quickened. "What do you want?" A long silence, then, "To remember." 2 days later, Claire was carrying groceries up the stairs when she heard someone call, "You're in 4B, right?" She turned. A man in his 60s stood halfway up the flight, a paper bag in his arms. He was thin, wiry, with a neatly trimmed beard and a cardigan that looked like it had been washed to softness decades ago. "Yeah," she said cautiously. "I used to live there, long time ago. Name's Mr. Halverson." She shifted the grocery bag against her hip. "Really? What was it like back then?" He chuckled without humor. "It was quieter. Different paint. Same creaky floorboards." He hesitated, lowering his voice. "Still got the vent in the bedroom?" Claire's grip tightened on the bag. "Yeah. That wasn't there when I moved in. One day I came home and there it was, cover and all. Landlord told me it was part of a renovation. Never felt right though. Cold draft in the summer. Smelled strange sometimes." "What kind of smell?" "Like flowers, but wrong. Sweet, but it made my stomach turn. I tried covering it up. Taped cardboard over it, even moved the bed. Didn't matter. Could still hear it." Claire's skin prickled. "Hear what?" He looked past her, toward the shadowed hallway. "Breathing." When she got back to her apartment, she sat at the kitchen table, staring at her groceries without unpacking them. Her mind kept replaying his words. That night, she taped a thick towel over the vent. The fabric dulled the rustling to a faint murmur, but sometime after midnight, she woke to a faint voice. "That's rude." She sat up, heart hammering. "It's not rude if I'm trying to sleep." "I liked watching you breathe." The towel shifted slightly, as if pulled from the other side, and a thin wisp of air slid into the room, carrying that faint, sweet smell. Claire paced her bedroom for an hour, the ring on her finger cold and heavy as if it had weight beyond its metal. She could feel it pulling at her, a subtle tug toward the vent. Finally, she took a deep breath and sat on the edge of the bed, staring up at the black opening. "All right," she whispered. "If you're in there, talk to me. Tell me what you want." The rustle inside the cavity stilled. For a moment, only the sound of her own breathing filled the room. Then, softly, almost like it was inches from her ear, "You shouldn't be scared."
Her stomach flipped. "Then why are you here? Why in my wall? I had nowhere else. You've moved into my place." She laughed nervously, the sound sharp in the quiet room. "You lived here? Like a long time ago?" "Yes." "Then why the vent? Why the whispering?" "So you'd hear me. So someone would remember." Her throat tightened. "Remember what?" The rustling grew louder, more urgent, as if the being behind the wall was brushing against the cavity's edges with its hands. "My name, my life, my story. It's all trapped here, and you're the first who listens." Claire shivered. "All right, I'll listen. I promise." There was silence again, but not the comforting kind. The air in the room felt fuller, almost crowded, like the space behind the vent had expanded just a fraction. "Good. You will understand soon, but not tonight." Before she could respond, the sound of soft dragging, like fingernails on wood, moved away from the vent, receding into the shadows of the wall. When she tried to sleep after that, her hand instinctively rested on the ring. It had grown warm again, as if alive, pulsing faintly against her skin. In the morning, the vent cover she had taped was back in place, neat, perfect, as if it had never been removed. Claire stared at it, realizing with a creeping dread
that she might not have put it back. The next day, Claire went to the city archives, determined to find out who had lived in her apartment before. She carried a notebook, a pen, and the unsettling sense that the ring's presence was urging her onward. The archivist, a young woman with glasses perched on the tip of her nose, led her to a stack of old tenant logs. These go back almost a century. Room numbers, names, dates. Claire flipped through them carefully, her fingers tracing faded ink. Then she stopped. 4B, Eleanora Matthews, 1897 to 1912. Her pulse quickened. EM, the same initials etched inside the ring. She copied down the entry and scanned for more. Notes scribbled in the margins mentioned complaints about drafts, faint smells, and strange noises at night. A handwritten addendum in the same spidery script read, "Voices from the walls. She listens. Must not leave." Claire felt her stomach tighten. That was her. She was the one listening. Back in her apartment, the ring felt heavier than ever, pulling at her finger. She set up her laptop and started searching newspaper archives. Over the next few hours, a pattern emerged. Eleanora Matthews had disappeared in 1912. The official record said she had vanished mysteriously, but letters to the building management spoke of a persistent presence in the walls and strange behavior, speaking to herself at night. She leaned back, mind spinning. The vent, the whispers, the ring. It wasn't random. "You see now." Her head jerked toward the vent. The voice was faint but unmistakable. It was softer than before, almost resigned. I see it," she whispered. "Eleanora Matthews. You're her." "I never left." The ring on her finger pulsed in response, warm and urgent. She could feel it tugging at her, pulling her toward the wall. That night, Claire sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her hand. The ring was warm now, almost pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. Every instinct told her to remove it, but her fingers felt numb, unresponsive. "Don't fight me," the voice whispered from the vent. I can't," she admitted aloud, panic rising. "It won't come off." "Good. You belong to me now." Her stomach dropped. She tried soap again, lotion, twisting, pulling, but the metal only tightened slightly, almost like it was alive and resisting. She caught herself in the mirror. Her reflection was her own, mostly, but her eyes had a faint sheen, almost silvery, that flickered when she looked away. The vent shifted, a subtle creak, as if Eleanora were moving inside. "Soon you will see what I see. Soon you will feel what I felt." Claire's chest tightened. "No, I don't want to." Too late. The lights flickered. A low, humming vibration ran through the floorboards, traveling up her legs. The air smelled sweet and metallic at once, and she could hear whispers, multiple now, overlapping. "Remember, remember, remember." The ring burned faintly against her skin, and her vision swirled. For a moment, she saw through Eleonora's eyes. A long, darkened apartment, narrow hallways, footsteps pacing, whispers bouncing off walls that didn't exist anymore. A sense of longing, trapped in the vent, seeping out to her. Claire gasped, collapsing onto the bed. She curled into herself, trying to resist.
but the entity's presence was now so close she could feel it pressing through the floorboards, the walls, even the mattress. You are my voice. You are my hands. You are mine. The ring flared, and the room plunged into darkness. Claire woke drenched in sweat, the ring burning against her finger. The vent above her bed was silent, but the room felt charged, as if every shadow were aware of her movements. She paced the room, trying to steady her breathing. "There has to be a way to stop this," she whispered. The moment she said it, the walls shifted. Not visibly, but subtly. A faint hum, almost like murmuring from deep inside the plaster. Every picture frame, every corner seemed to lean slightly towards the vent. "You know there isn't," Eleonora's voice sighed from above. "I am inside you now. The walls are my home, and soon so will you be." Claire ran to the vent, clutching the metal cover. "You're trapped in there. I'm not—" "You're already here," the voice cut in, sharper now, almost angry. "Do you feel it? Do you feel the pull? I can reach through." The ring flared, pulsing rhythmically, sending shockwaves through her hand and up her arm. She dropped the vent cover. The sound echoed, louder than it should have. Then the air shifted. A faint breeze carried a scent of old books and rotten flowers, drifting across the room like someone breathing directly into her face. Claire stumbled backward. "Stop!" "No," whispered multiple voices now, layering over one another. "We wait. We remember. You will not forget." Her gaze darted to the hallway mirror. She froze. Her reflection no longer mimicked her movements. It smiled faintly, a cold, knowing curve of the lips, even as her own face screamed in terror. Claire tore her eyes away. "I need help," she muttered, fumbling for her phone. It wouldn't work. Every app she opened froze. The screen flickered. The camera, when she tried to check herself, only displayed a shadowy figure behind her, glimpsed for a heartbeat before it vanished. "You belong to the vent now," Eleonora whispered, soft but omnipresent. "And soon you'll help me finish." The next morning, Claire dragged herself to the public library, her hands trembling slightly as she carried her notebook and the ring, now cold but still heavy against her finger. She had to know if anyone else had dealt with the apartment's strange phenomena. She began with microfilm records of newspapers from the early 1900s. Dusty, faded columns described Eleonora Matthews' life in the building, her fascination with hidden passages, secret chambers, and her sudden disappearance in 1912. A margin note caught her eye. "Neighbors report strange sounds, whispers from walls. Tenant obsessed with the unseen. Landlord forbids interference. Something in the vent is wrong." Claire's hand tightened around her pen. She scribbled furiously, then moved to city archives, searching property records. One map from 1899 depicted a series of sealed wall cavities in her apartment's block, the very space where her vent now sat. Her heart raced as she traced the walls with her finger. One cavity was marked, "Private, do not enter," and beside it, scrawled in pencil, was a name she recognized immediately. Eleonora Matthews. "You see?" A voice hissed in her mind, sudden and close, making her flinch. "I am everywhere. I am nothing. I am the walls." "I don't understand. How can I fight you?" she whispered aloud.
trembling. "You cannot fight," it answered, soft but insistent. "You can only listen or join me." She bit her lip, staring at the map. The sealed cavity lined up perfectly with the vent in her bedroom. A plan started to form in her mind. If she could access the cavity, maybe she could find some clue, some object or record that Eleonora had left behind that would anchor the spirit and weaken its hold over the ring. But even as she considered it, the ring pulsed against her skin, warm and insistent, urging her to do the opposite, stay put, obey, and become part of the unseen spaces forever. Claire took a deep breath, clutching her notebook. "I'll do it. I'll find a way," she said firmly, though her voice wavered. "I won't let you take me." "We'll see," Eleonora whispered. "We'll see." The library clock ticked loudly, a countdown she could almost feel in her bones. Claire returned home that evening, carrying a small toolkit she had bought, a flashlight, gloves, pry bars, and a notebook full of sketches and notes. Every step up the stairs felt heavier than before, the building groaning as if it knew what she planned. The apartment was silent at first, too silent. No creaks, no whispers, no draft from the vent. Claire shivered, realizing the calm felt unnatural, almost predatory. She set the toolkit on the bed, staring at the vent. "This ends tonight," she whispered, voice tight with determination. The ring on her finger pulsed faintly, almost like a heartbeat. Claire traced her fingernail over the etched initials, E.M. It had to be a tether, she thought. If she could understand it, maybe she could sever the connection. "You cannot undo me," Eleonora whispered suddenly, making the hair on Claire's neck rise. "You will belong, whether you want to or not." Claire clenched her jaw. "Not tonight." She taped the flashlight to her head, secured gloves over her hands, and pried at the vent cover. The metal groaned, and for a moment she swore she felt a pull, subtle but insistent, like the air itself was trying to drag her toward the opening. "Come in," the voice beckoned, coaxing, almost sweet now. "We'll show you. You'll understand. Don't fight." Her stomach churned, but she pulled the cover away fully. Darkness stared back. The cavity beyond the vent was narrow, just wide enough for her arm, but the air was unnaturally cold, carrying that same rotten sweet scent from before. Claire shined the flashlight inside. The beam revealed nothing but shadows, yet she felt eyes watching her from within the darkness. Eleonora's presence, patient and waiting. "Come closer," the voice murmured. "We've been waiting for someone who listens." Her gloved hands trembled, but she crouched and began probing inside the cavity, feeling along the edges of the wall. Her fingers brushed something smooth and metallic. She pulled it out, a small locket, tarnished with age, bearing the same initials, E.M. The ring on her finger flared instantly, pain and warmth radiating through her hand. She gasped and dropped the locket onto the floor, but it didn't stop pulsing. The two objects seemed to resonate across time and space. "Ah," the voice breathed, almost triumphant. "You found me." Claire swallowed hard. What do you want from me?" "To be remembered," Eleonora whispered. "To live, and you will help me." The walls creaked louder, as if the building itself were flexing, testing her resolve. Dust drifted down from the ceiling, and the vent above her groaned like a living thing. Claire steadied herself. "I don't want to help you. I want to end this." "We'll see," the voice hissed. "We'll see how brave you are when the wall starts speaking back." Claire knelt on the floor, staring at the locket. It gleamed faintly in the flashlight's beam, almost as if it was alive, pulsing in rhythm with the ring on her finger. The room grew colder. Shadows lengthened along the walls, twisting unnaturally, pooling in corners where light shouldn't reach. A low guttural whisper echoed from the vent. "Take me, keep me, remember me." Claire shivered, her breath forming mist in the air. I don't belong to you," she said aloud, though her voice trembled. "You do," the voice hissed, louder now, multiple layers overlapping. "You always did. You just forgot." The locket jumped slightly, as if it had a heartbeat of its own. Claire reached toward it, feeling the pull, magnetic, insistent. She hesitated, then grasped it firmly. Immediately, the room shifted. Floorboards creaked under phantom weight, and the walls seemed to bend slowly inward. The air was thick with whispers, intelligible, overlapping, almost a chant. "We wait, we wait, we wait." Claire stumbled backward, clutching the locket. Her flashlight flickered and went out. Darkness swallowed the room. She felt something brush against her arm, cold, insistent, like fingers made of mist. "Do you see now?" the voice asked, softer, coaxing, almost intimate. "Do you see what it is to be trapped?" Claire forced herself to focus. "Yes," she whispered. "I see you. I see your suffering. But I won't be trapped like you." "Ah, brave," Eleonora murmured. "But courage is not enough. You must understand." The walls rattled violently. Dust and plaster fell, and the air became heavy, thick with that sweet metallic scent. The locket began to glow faintly, casting sickly light on the twisting shadows. Claire held it out, and suddenly the ring flared. Pain shot through her finger, and she cried out, falling to the floor. The shadows recoiled slightly, then surged forward like liquid smoke. The walls remember," whispered multiple voices echoing through the apartment. "The walls remember, and now you do too." Claire's vision blurred. For a moment, she saw the apartment as it had been over a century ago. Narrow hallways, darkened rooms, Eleonora Matthews, pacing, whispering. To the walls themselves seemed alive, pressing against her vision, stretching, flexing, holding secrets. When she blinked, she was back on the floor, the locket clutched to her chest, the ring scorching her finger. The room was silent again, but the shadows lingered, pooling near the corners. Claire realized something chilling. The apartment had shown her the past, but it wasn't done. Eleanor's presence was patient, waiting for Claire to falter, to give in. "We are patient," the voice whispered from the vent. "And soon, you will understand the walls as I do." Claire pressed the locket and ring together instinctively. The light from the locket flared, and she felt a surge of energy, like a tug of war between her will and the entities. The shadows recoiled again, hissing like a living thing, but did not vanish. Claire knew then the struggle was only beginning. The apartment would not let her leave untouched, and Eleonora would not rest until her story was fully told, whether Claire survived it or became part of it. Claire sat cross-legged on the floor, the locket and ring before her. The apartment was quiet now, deceptively so, the shadows lingering just beyond her flashlight's reach. Her hands shook, but she was determined. She had to anchor Eleonora's spirit to take back control. From her notebook, she reread the notes she'd copied from old records, mentions of small rituals, whispered invocations, and objects tethered to the dead. The locket, pulsing faintly with the same energy as the ring, had to be the key. She whispered aloud, "I don't know if this will work, but I have to try." "Yes, yes, try," the voice breathed, faint and coaxing, almost approving. Claire drew a circle on the floor with chalk she had brought from the library. She placed the locket in the center and the ring beside it, careful not to touch both at the same time. Then she began chanting, words borrowed from the old records, a mix of protective invocations and commands. The air grew heavy, the temperature dropping rapidly. Her breath came in visible clouds swirling around the circle. Shadows twisted along the walls, stretching unnaturally, almost as if watching, waiting. "You cannot bind me," Eleonora whispered from every corner. "You are mine." Claire's hands shook as she focused on the locket. "I bind you to this object. You cannot reach beyond it," she shouted. Suddenly the ring flared violently, burning her finger, and she fell backward. The shadows surged like a wave, tendrils of darkness reaching for her. The locket glowed intensely, a bright, piercing light that cut through the shadows. The apartment seemed to scream, the walls vibrating, floorboards creaking. Dust and small debris swirled around her. Claire gritted her teeth and repeated the chant, louder this time, more forcefully. "No! Stop!" Eleonora screamed, her voice a cacophony of whispers now, overlapping and desperate. You cannot do this." The light from the locket flared again, and suddenly there was silence. The shadows pulled back, the oppressive weight of the air lifting slightly. Claire, gasping, held the locket over the ring. It pulsed once, sharply, then stilled. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then, softly, Eleonora's voice returned, calmer, almost contemplative. "You have strength. Perhaps more than I expected. We wait and see." Claire exhaled, exhausted, the ring cool against her finger for the first time in days. The shadows lingered faintly, but the oppressive, suffocating presence had withdrawn. The entity was still there, tethered now, constrained by the locket, but she knew it would test her again. She looked around the apartment. It was still her home, for now, but she could feel it watching, measuring, waiting for the next moment of weakness. The ring was no longer an unbreakable chain, but a reminder of what could happen if she faltered. Claire whispered to herself, "I survived tonight, and I'll survive the next. Somehow." The locket rested on the floor, glowing faintly. It was her key, her anchor, her weapon, and she knew the battle had only begun. Claire awoke to the faint hum of the apartment, not the usual creaks or settling sounds, but something deliberate, almost rhythmic, like a heartbeat. She sat up and rubbed her eyes, the ring on her finger now cool but pulsing faintly, a reminder of Eleonora's tethered presence. The locket sat on her bedside table, glowing softly. She reached for it, and immediately the shadows in the corner seemed to shiver, as if aware of her intent. "Good morning," the voice whispered, layered and patient. "Or shall we wake you properly?" Claire shivered. "I'm awake, and I'm ready." The apartment responded immediately. A picture frame fell off the wall, glass shattering. The mirror in the hallway rippled, reflecting not Claire, but Eleonora's face, pale, wide-eyed, staring back with a slight, cruel smile. Claire grabbed her flashlight, stepping toward the mirror. The reflection mimicked her movements at first, then slowly began to act independently, tilting its head, smirking, mouthing words she couldn't hear. "You cannot hide," Eleonora hissed. "Every shadow knows you. Every corner watches. We are patient." Claire's pulse raced. She circled the room, holding the locket and repeating protective chants under her breath. The shadows seemed to retreat at first, only to surge forward again, pooling under the furniture, reaching like liquid darkness. She heard whispers from every wall, fragments of sentences, memories not her own. A child laughing, a woman screaming, footsteps pacing the floor above, though the building was empty.
Claire pressed the locket tightly to her chest. "You're not taking me, not today," she muttered. "We are not taking. We are waiting," the voice replied, softer now, almost contemplative. but you will tire. And then, suddenly, the apartment shifted. Floorboards warped beneath her feet. A door slammed somewhere in the building. The shadows coalesced into vaguely humanoid shapes, their forms shimmering, almost liquid. They moved toward her, testing her resolve. Claire braced herself. She extended the locket outward, the glow intensifying. The shadows recoiled, hissing, and she repeated the chants louder, stronger, more insistent. The locket's light flared, filling the room. The shadows retreated into corners, curling against the walls as if burned. The mirrors stopped rippling. The whispers fell silent, and the temperature slowly returned to normal. Claire sank to the floor, exhausted. Sweat ran down her temples, but she had survived another trial. The apartment had tried everything, illusions, sounds, physical manifestations, and yet she remained standing. The locket pulsed faintly in her hand. Eleonora's voice now quieter, restrained. "You are strong," it whispered. "We will see how long you last. Patience is our ally, and time favors the walls." Claire exhaled slowly. The apartment was still, but the shadows lingered in the corners, watching, testing, waiting. She knew she could not rest. The binding ritual had worked partially, but Eleonora was patient, and the apartment would escalate. She whispered to herself, voice barely audible, "I will survive. I have to. I'll end this." The locket glowed faintly in the dim light of dawn. Claire knew this was only the beginning of the battle, and the apartment would not wait long to challenge her again. Claire spent the morning at the small library near her apartment, poring over old city records, newspapers, and manuscripts she had collected over the past weeks. Each reference to Eleonora Matthews revealed fragments of her life. A lonely woman obsessed with secrets, rumored to have dabbled in occult rituals, leaving behind strange symbols and objects tied to her presence. She took copious notes, her hands trembling with both excitement and fear. "If I can understand the methods she used, maybe I can contain her," she whispered to herself. By afternoon, she returned home, her backpack heavy with old texts and carefully copied symbols. The apartment greeted her with an unnatural chill, the shadows stretching along the hallway walls as if anticipating her next move. "Back so soon," Eleonora's voice purred from the vent, deceptively calm. "Did you learn anything useful?" Claire tightened her grip on the locket. "Yes, and it's going to help me." The lights flickered. A draft swept through the apartment, carrying whispers from all corners. The mirror in the hallway rippled again, this time showing a room she did not recognize. A parlor from decades past, with Eleonora standing at the center, staring directly at her. Claire closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. "It's just an illusion. I know it's just an illusion," she muttered. The shadows in the corners began to writhe, forming elongated, grotesque shapes, creeping toward her. Objects rattled on shelves, and a low moan echoed from the vent. She drew a protective circle on the floor, placing the locket in the center, and began marking symbols from her notes along the edges. Each mark pulsed faintly, reacting to the locket's glow. "Clever," Eleonora hissed, "but cleverness will not save you when the walls themselves turn against you." As she worked, the apartment intensified its attacks. Shadows erupted from the corners, coiling like serpents around her feet. The chandelier above swung violently, sending sparks and broken glass raining down. She dodged, clutching the locket, repeating her chants. The mirrors now reflected multiple versions of herself, all moving independently, some screaming, others laughing, all silent but maddeningly lifelike. Claire's pulse raced. The air was thick, oppressive, each breath a labor.
She focused on the symbols, tracing each line with precision, feeling the energy between the locket, ring, and her own intent. Slowly, the shadows recoiled, the illusions flickered, and the temperature returned to a manageable chill. Eleonora's voice softened, almost reluctant. "You are persistent, perhaps too persistent, but persistence can tire even the strongest." Claire exhaled, beads of sweat on her forehead. She had survived another round, learned more about Eleonora's methods, and strengthened her own protective measures. But she knew this was far from over. The apartment was testing her limits, both mentally and physically. She whispered to herself, voice resolute, "I have to finish this. I will anchor you. I will end this." The locket pulsed faintly, almost in agreement, a tiny beacon of hope amid the growing menace of the apartment's relentless presence. Claire cleared the living room floor, moving furniture aside to create a large circle. Candles flickered along its edge, casting trembling shadows that seemed to reach toward her. The locket rested in the center, the ring beside it, both pulsing faintly. She took a deep breath and began chanting, her voice steady but loud enough to fill the room. Each symbol she had drawn from her research seemed to react, glowing faintly as if feeding off the energy of her words. The apartment responded almost immediately. The walls groaned, floorboards shuddered, and shadows elongated, slithering along the edges of the room like liquid.
Smoke. The mirrors quivered, reflecting not her own image, but fragmented versions of Eleonora, multiple faceless copies that watched her with hollow eyes. "Do you think you can contain me?" Eleonora's voice hissed from the vents, overlapping in multiple layers. "Do you think a few symbols, a circle, can bind what belongs to these walls?" Claire's hand shook as she extended the locket outward, focusing on its glow. "I will anchor you. You cannot leave this circle." Suddenly, the apartment's reality warped. Time fractured, the clock spun backward, forward, and stopped entirely. She felt herself pulled in multiple directions at once. Whispers of past tenants, long dead voices, and Eleonora's own tortured cries filled the air. Shadows erupted from the walls, reaching for her, grabbing at her clothes, her hair, her skin. The floor beneath her feet felt liquid, shifting and twisting. Claire gritted her teeth, pressing the locket closer to the ring. "I am stronger than your walls. I am stronger than your fear," she shouted. The locket flared, brighter than ever. The shadows recoiled, the air snapped with energy, and the mirrors shattered simultaneously, shards falling like icy rain. The fractured reflections of Eleonora screamed, fading slowly into nothingness. But the apartment was relentless. Floorboards cracked, plaster rained from the ceiling, and the temperature dropped to freezing. Claire's fingers burned on the ring, her voice hoarse from chanting, but she pressed on, drawing the energy from the symbols and her intent into the locket. "You are strong, but even strong wills can break," Eleonora whispered, almost reverent, almost pleading. "Will you endure until the end?" Claire's vision blurred, sweat freezing on her skin, teeth chattering, but she held the locket high. "I will endure!" she screamed. The locket pulsed violently, a wave of light exploding outward, forcing shadows back, forcing the apartment into silence, if only temporarily. She collapsed to her knees, gasping, the room trembling around her. The locket lay in her hand, glowing faintly, a tether between her and the unseen tenant. She knew the ritual had anchored Eleonora partially, constraining her, but not ending her presence entirely. The apartment was quiet now, eerily so, but the air felt charged, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Claire shivered, exhausted but resolute. "You have done well," the voice murmured, calm but cold. "But the apartment remembers everything, and we are patient." Claire whispered back, her voice barely audible, yet firm. "Then I will remain vigilant.
I will finish this, one way or another. The locket pulsed faintly in her palm, almost in agreement, as the shadows retreated to the corners. But the apartment still watched, still waited, still testing. The battle had escalated, and Claire knew the hardest trials were yet to come. Claire woke to a strange stillness. The apartment was silent, too silent. The morning light seeped through the blinds, but something felt off. The shadows were sharper now, edges twisting unnaturally, and the air smelled faintly of smoke and iron. She touched the ring. It pulsed faintly. The locket lay nearby, dim but steady. She realized with a sinking heart that the apartment wasn't just testing her anymore. It was rewriting reality around her. The clock on the wall spun backward, then forward, and stopped entirely. She blinked and found herself standing in her living room, but the furniture had shifted slightly, subtle changes she couldn't explain. The apartment was alive in a way that went beyond shadows and whispers. "Do you see now?" Eleanor's voice slithered through the vents, overlapping in multiple layers. "Do you think time bends for me? Walls obey me? You are trapped in the same space, but not the same moment. We are patient, and patience wears on even the strongest." Claire gritted her teeth, clutching the locket. She tried to steady her mind, reciting the protective chants, but the apartment struck quickly. Mirrors multiplied, reflecting not one Claire but dozens, all performing slightly different movements, all mouthing words she couldn't understand. The walls began to pulse, as if breathing. The shadows stretched long and thin, snaking across the floor and ceiling, coiling like living smoke. She felt cold fingers brush her arms, and each time she turned, the room had shifted again. She stumbled into the hallway and froze. The door at the far end appeared impossibly far, the hallway stretching like a corridor in a nightmare. She ran, breath shallow, chest burning, but the apartment responded. The distance stretched, the shadows lengthened, and the whispers grew louder. "You cannot escape," the voice murmured from every direction. "Your mind bends, your body tires, your will falters. How long before you break?" Claire fell to her knees, gripping the locket. She tried to focus on one point, one symbol, one line of energy, anything to anchor herself. Slowly, the locket's glow brightened, responding to her determination. She repeated the chant over and over, louder, stronger, until the whispers faltered. Suddenly, she felt weightless, then heavy, then weightless again. Time fractured, minutes stretching into hours, seconds collapsing into instants. She saw visions, Eleanor's life in flashes, the building's construction, tenants long dead. Every detail felt real, and yet unreal. Claire's hands shook, teeth chattering, eyes stinging from exhaustion. She whispered to herself, voice raw, "I will not break. I will survive." The apartment's distortion slowed, the shadows retreating slightly, though still lingering like smoke in the corners. The mirrors shattered again, fragments clinking across the floor. The air was heavy, but steady. Eleanor's voice returned, quieter now, almost tired. "You endure, stronger than I anticipated. But the apartment, it remembers, and it waits." Claire sank to the floor, tears running down her face. She had survived another assault, but the apartment had shown her the full extent of its power. Reality itself was a weapon.
Clutching the locket, she whispered, "I will finish this. I will anchor you completely. No more games." The shadows remained, just out of reach, curling in the corners. The apartment was patient. And now, Claire realized, so was she. Claire spent the entire morning preparing. The living room was now a labyrinth of symbols, candles, and protective talismans. She had drawn on every scrap of research, every note she had collected over weeks, ancient wards, modern seals, and personal glyphs she had devised herself. The locket rested in the center of the largest circle, glowing softly. The ring was tied to it with a thread soaked in salt and herbs, a tether connecting Claire's intent to the object. She stepped back, eyes scanning the perimeter, making sure each line was perfect. "You think this will stop me?" Eleonora's voice hissed from the vents, layered and mocking. "You cannot bind me completely." Claire's jaw tightened. "You will be contained. I've survived everything you've thrown at me, and I will finish this now." The apartment responded immediately. Shadows erupted from every corner, thick, dark, and writhing. The mirrors across the walls reflected not only Eleonora, but a dozen past tenants, all reaching, all screaming, all trying to break Claire's concentration. The floor buckled beneath her feet, and the air filled with a low, grinding sound, like metal bending. Candles flickered violently, smoke curling into the shape of hands. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to collapse, to surrender. Claire forced herself to her knees in the circle, gripping the locket. She began chanting, louder than ever, voice echoing off the walls. The symbols pulsed in response, bright lines of light tracing across the floor and up the walls. The shadows lunged. She flinched, but did not break her focus. The locket flared, sending waves of light outward. The apartment groaned, the walls vibrating, mirrors shattering in synchronized bursts. Time warped again. Moments stretched into hours, then collapsed into seconds. She saw visions of Eleonora's life, the construction of the building, every tenant who had suffered under the apartment's influence, but she did not waver. "You endure too much," Eleonora's whispered, almost sorrowfully. "Even I did not imagine such resistance." Claire's voice was raw, strained, but unyielding. "I will anchor you, completely. This ends tonight." She focused all her energy into the locket, threading her intent through the ring, through the circle, through every protective symbol. The shadows screamed, the mirrors cracked, the floor buckled, and the air froze, but Claire held firm. The apartment convulsed, as if resisting, trying to expel her presence. A whirlwind of objects, light and shadow erupted around her. She clenched her eyes shut, pouring every ounce of her will into the locket, chanting until her throat burned, until her voice cracked, until she could no longer distinguish reality from hallucination. Then, silence. Claire opened her eyes. The apartment was still. The shadows had receded into the corners, thin and insubstantial. The mirrors reflected only her own face. The locket pulsed faintly, a tether of control and restraint. Eleonora's voice came one last time, soft, almost respectful. "You have endured, stronger than the walls themselves. Perhaps you are worthy of peace." Claire collapsed, exhausted but victorious. The apartment was quiet, truly quiet, for the first time. She knew the spirit was anchored, restrained, unable to influence the apartment beyond the faintest whispers and shadows. For the first time in weeks, Claire breathed freely. The locket glowed softly in her hand, a reminder of the battle fought and the vigilance still required. The apartment had been tamed, for now, and she knew that while the walls remembered and the shadows lingered, she had emerged stronger, patient, resilient, unbroken. The apartment waited, yes, but she was ready. Days passed slowly. The apartment no longer screamed, the shadows no longer reached, and the mirrors reflected only Claire's own image. Yet something had changed within her. Every step across the floor reminded her of the battle waged and survived. Every corner of the apartment whispering faintly, just enough to keep her alert. Claire sat by the window one morning, the locket resting on the table beside her. Sunlight streamed in, golden and warm, but she noticed the shadows lingering slightly longer, pooling where they shouldn't. She shivered, not from cold, but memory. "You have bound me," Eleonora's voice whispered softly, barely audible, a mere echo. "But I am patient, and I watch." Claire touched the locket. "And I will remain vigilant," she replied, voice steady but quiet. She had learned, over the weeks, that victory was not about silence or absence, but control, a balance between restraint and awareness. She began documenting everything, the rituals, the chants, the symbols, every hallucination, every manipulation of time and space. It became a journal of survival, both a record and a safeguard against future threats. At night, she sometimes heard faint footsteps in the hall, the softest whisper of movement or a flicker in the corner of her eye. The apartment was alive, still, but not hostile, restrained. She could feel the tension like a taut string under her careful watch. Her dreams were restless. She saw Eleonora's life in fragments, her fears, her obsessions, her loneliness. But now, the visions carried no threat, only warning. She began to understand the spirit more, a psychological connection forming through proximity and awareness.
One evening, she sat cross-legged on the floor, the locket in her hand, ring beside it, and whispered a meditation chant. "I am calm. I am in control. You remain contained." A faint breeze brushed past her face, carrying a whisper so soft it almost sounded like approval. "Wise, persistent, worthy." Claire exhaled, eyes closed, feeling the apartment breathe around her. The quiet was fragile, the peace delicate, but for the first time since Eleonora's appearance, she allowed herself a deep, unbroken breath. The apartment remained a living presence, shadows lurking in corners, faint sounds echoing in empty rooms, but no longer threatening. Claire had survived, adapted, and established a fragile harmony, a tenuous coexistence with the unseen tenant she had anchored. Outside, life went on as normal. Inside, Claire had found her own rhythm, a quiet vigilance that became routine. She knew the spirit's patience matched her own, and she knew, deep down, that while the apartment waited, so did she, ready, steady, unbroken. For now at least, the battle had ended. Months had passed. The apartment seemed calm, the violent disturbances a distant memory, yet Claire felt the tension beneath the surface. Every evening as the sunlight faded, she noticed subtle anomalies, a shadow lingering a heartbeat too long, a whisper carried on the breeze that seemed almost intentional. She had grown adept at interpreting these signs. A candle that flickered in an unusual pattern indicated Eleonora's attention. A shifted object, just slightly out of place, meant the apartment itself was testing her. The disturbances were no longer attacks, they were reminders. One night, as Claire sat cross-legged on the floor, tracing the protective symbols with her finger, she felt the locket pulse faintly. She looked around the room, shadows thin but perceptible along the corners. "You are vigilant," Eleonora's voice murmured, soft and almost approving. "But do you see how easy it is to forget, to let down your guard?" Claire swallowed hard. "I have not forgotten," she whispered back, gripping the locket. "I will not forget. I will remain vigilant." The air shifted. A breeze caressed her neck, though the windows were shut. The shadows stretched, almost reaching toward her, then receded when she focused on the circle. She realized the apartment's influence had become a constant presence, a quiet test of her resolve, rather than open aggression. Days blended into nights, each one filled with subtle reminders, a faint tapping behind a wall, the low hum of movement where nothing should be,
reflections and mirrors that seemed to linger an extra moment before disappearing. She cataloged these events meticulously, each one a pattern, a dialogue between herself and the unseen tenant. Claire began to notice psychological changes. Her awareness sharpened, her reflexes faster, but her sleep suffered. Dreams filled with fragments of Eleonora's life, fragments of her fears, her loneliness, her rage. Even in victory, the apartment and its tenant shaped her mind, teaching vigilance and patience. She sometimes caught herself talking aloud to the shadows, rehearsing her protective rituals. Friends grew concerned at her quiet intensity, but she could not explain. The apartment had become a teacher, and she its student. One evening, a candle flared violently in the corner. Claire froze. The locket pulsed in response. She spoke aloud, calm but firm. "I am here. I am vigilant. You remain contained." The shadows hesitated, and for a long moment, silence followed. Then a faint whisper echoed from the walls. "Wise, persistent, enduring. We watch, and you endure." Claire exhaled slowly, aware that the balance had shifted. No longer raw confrontation, no longer violent attacks. Now there was subtle negotiation, a quiet acknowledgement of limits. She understood that victory had not ended the presence, only changed its nature. As she moved through the apartment, she felt the walls pulse with memory and attention. Eleonora remained, a constant, subtle companion, testing patience, focus, and strength. Claire accepted it, knowing that vigilance would never end, that survival now meant coexistence and constant awareness. The apartment waited, as it always had. But Claire, months later, had adapted. Stronger, sharper, tempered by the trials, she had become the anchor, the stabilizing force. And in the quiet of the apartment, that fragile, enduring balance was all she could ask for. A full year had passed since Claire first anchored Eleonora. The apartment remained calm on the surface, quiet and orderly, yet Claire had grown accustomed to the subtle pulses of its attention. Every shadow, every faint creak in the floorboards, every whisper of air was a reminder that the building itself was alive, watching, testing, waiting. She moved through her apartment with practiced care. Candles were always lit at night, protective symbols faintly drawn in corners and along thresholds. Mirrors were carefully positioned, not just to reflect the room, but to monitor the apartment's subtle shifts. Even her furniture placement was deliberate, part of a pattern of vigilance she had created over the months. Her friends noticed changes. Claire was sharper, more meticulous, and quieter. Her eyes, they said, held a weight, a watchfulness that made ordinary conversation difficult. She smiled politely but rarely shared the truth. The apartment was patient. It didn't require anyone else to understand it, only her. Sleep remained the hardest part. Dreams were long and vivid, filled with fragmented images of Eleonora's life, the construction of the building, the tenants who had come before. The apartment spoke in these dreams, testing her will even as she slept, teaching lessons she could not ignore. One evening, she sat at her desk, journal open, recording an odd phenomenon. The locket pulsed faintly as she wrote, and the air felt heavier than usual. She paused, hand on the locket, and whispered, "I am aware. I am vigilant. You remain contained." The room seemed to exhale. Shadows in the corners shifted, not threatening, but reminding her of their presence. Claire understood the apartment's language now. Subtlety, suggestion, patient nudges rather than outright terror. Outside, life carried on. The city hummed. People went about their routines, unaware of the living, breathing entity hidden behind concrete and plaster walls. Inside, Claire's life had become a negotiation of balance. The apartment had taught her endurance, and she had learned the art of coexistence. Months later, she began experimenting with more complex rituals, reinforcing the containment. Layers of protection intertwined with her intent and the locket's energy, creating a network of wards that responded to shifts in the apartment. Sometimes, she would feel the faintest tug at her focus, a reminder that Eleanor's patience was as long as her own. She accepted it. Life in the apartment was not about freedom from the spirit, but a partnership of vigilance. The apartment tested, she endured. The lessons were subtle but relentless. Patience, awareness, resilience. Even on quiet nights, she could feel the building's heartbeat, a low pulse beneath the floor, a faint pressure in the walls. Eleanor's whispers were barely audible, approving murmurs that urged mindfulness. Claire responded, softly, constantly. I am here. I am vigilant. You remain contained. And so life continued, measured and deliberate. The apartment waited, and Claire endured. She was no longer simply a tenant. She was the anchor, the stabilizing force. The building remembered, and so did she. The world outside might never understand, but within the walls, a careful balance had been forged. Fragile, patient, enduring. Years had passed, and Claire had become inseparable from the apartment. Its walls no longer frightened her. They communicated with her in subtle shifts of air, temperature, and shadow. She had learned to read these cues instinctively, adjusting her rituals, her movements, even her thoughts to maintain the delicate balance. The apartment itself had grown more sophisticated in its influence. Shadows now moved almost playfully, objects subtly rearranging themselves as if testing her attention. Whispered voices, once aggressive, had become faint, precise suggestions, nudges that challenged her perceptions without breaking her focus. Claire had changed as well. She no longer viewed herself as merely containing Eleanora. She was part of the apartment's ecosystem. Her senses sharpened to the faintest movements, her dreams attuned to its subtle rhythms. Sleep was still restless, but she had learned to interpret visions as messages, fragments of memory and intention woven into a dialogue between tenant and building. Friends rarely visited. They noticed her intensity, the meticulous order of her home, the weight behind her calm eyes. Claire smiled politely, never revealing the depth of her vigilance. To outsiders, she seemed hyper-aware, almost unnaturally precise, but the truth was far stranger. She had merged her awareness with the apartment's consciousness, a symbiosis forged over years of constant negotiation. One evening, she walked through the apartment, touching walls and floors lightly, reading the subtle vibrations that indicated shifts in the unseen presence. The locket glowed faintly in her pocket, a heartbeat of control linking her intent to Eleanora's containment. "You have endured," a whisper murmured from the walls, almost approvingly. "You have adapted, but do you understand the cost?" Claire paused, eyes steady. "I understand," she replied softly. "I accept it." The cost was clear. Her mind had changed. She thought in patterns of cause and effect, anticipation and reflection. Her dreams were rich with layers of perception, fragments of Eleanora's memory, echoes of the building's rhythms. Loneliness, fear, and aggression had been replaced by vigilance, patience, and an unyielding focus. Her humanity had not vanished, but it had transformed, tempered by years of quiet negotiation with the unseen tenant. Small anomalies continued. Objects shifted when unobserved. Shadows lingered in impossible angles. Faint sounds echoed where no source existed. But Claire no longer reacted with fear. She responded with calm precision, tracing symbols, whispering protective chants, reinforcing the wards that had become extensions of her own mind. She sat by the window one night, the city lights sprawling below, and felt the apartment pulse beneath her feet. The building was alive, aware, and she was part of it. Eleanora's presence was no longer a threat, It was a force contained, subtly teaching patience and endurance, a constant reminder that vigilance never truly ends. Claire exhaled slowly. She had survived violence, manipulation, and temporal distortions. She had endured the relentless testing of the apartment. Now she and the building existed in a fragile, interdependent harmony, a symbiosis born from fear, forged in fire, and tempered by years of careful attention. The city outside remained unaware. Life moved on. But within the apartment, Claire and Eleonora existed in a delicate balance, an eternal dialogue of awareness, control, and restraint. The building remembered, and so did she. And Claire knew, as she always would, that this vigilance was her life now, endless, quiet, and unyielding. Decades had passed. The city outside had changed. Buildings rose and fell, streets were repaved, and generations of strangers came and went. But within the apartment, time had a different rhythm. Claire had grown older, her hair streaked with silver, her movements slower but precise. The apartment, too, had aged, yet it remained alive, an ever-watchful entity that responded to her presence and her intent. Over the years, her awareness had evolved into something almost unnatural. She could sense subtle shifts, the faintest vibration of a floorboard signaling movement elsewhere, a whisper carried through the air that suggested focus or distraction, even the faint pulse of the locket syncing with the apartment's energy. Every corner, every shadow, every reflected surface was a node in a vast network of vigilance she had created over decades. Eleanor's presence had also changed. Once violent and demanding, then contained and subtle, it had become almost cooperative. The spirit moved within invisible boundaries, its whispers now a language of guidance and caution rather than threat. It tested Claire still, but these tests were more like riddles, challenges meant to keep her alert, alive to the intricacies of their shared existence. Claire's rituals had become second nature. Each night, she traced intricate symbols on the floor, lighting candles at precise intervals. She whispered protective chants, her voice low, calm, and rhythmic. These acts were no longer merely protective. They were meditative, a dialogue with the unseen tenant, a way to reinforce the delicate balance they had forged over decades. Yet the toll was evident. Years of vigilance had reshaped her mind. She thought in patterns of cause and effect, anticipation and reflection. Her dreams were rich with layers of perception, fragments of Eleanor's memory, echoes of the building's rhythms, construction, ghostly hints of tenants long gone. Sleep had never been fully restorative. It had become another domain of vigilance. Despite the solitude and the strain, Claire had adapted completely. She walked through the apartment like a conductor orchestrating a symphony of shadows, whispers, and flickering light. Even when she did not speak, her presence guided the apartment's energies, the boundaries of containment subtly reinforced by her intent alone. The apartment had grown smarter, more sentient, as if decades of cohabitation had shaped its awareness. Shadows moved with deliberate purpose. Objects shifted subtly, teaching attention. Whispers hinted at danger, but also knowledge. Claire listened. She learned. She responded. And the balance held. One winter evening, she sat by the window, the city blanketed in snow. The apartment hummed softly beneath her fingertips, the locket warm against her chest. "You endure," Eleonora whispered, almost reverently. "You endure beyond fear, beyond time, beyond the limits of flesh and memory. You are part of this place now." Claire smiled faintly, her voice calm and unwavering. "And you remain contained, as always." The shadows shifted, not threatening, but acknowledging. The apartment exhaled quietly, a low, steady rhythm that spoke of equilibrium. For decades, the building had tested her, taught her, and demanded vigilance. And for decades, she had endured, adapted, and survived. Outside, the world carried on, oblivious. Inside, Claire existed in a delicate, eternal dance, the human anchor and the bound spirit, symbiotic, vigilant, and unbroken. Every flicker of light, every whispered suggestion, every subtle vibration of the walls was part of a constant dialogue, a life built on attention, endurance, and the quiet mastery of fear. And so it would continue, indefinitely. The apartment remembered. Claire remembered. And the unseen tenant waited, patient, ever aware, contained, and respected.
Claire spoke rarely now, but when she did, her voice resonated not just through the air, but through the very structure itself. "Balance is maintained," she whispered one night, eyes closed, hand resting lightly on a wall that seemed to respond to her touch. The building hummed softly, acknowledging her statement, confirming the equilibrium they had maintained for decades. Her dreams had evolved as well. No longer nightmares, no longer fragmented memories. They were full dialogues with the apartment and its unseen tenant. She could perceive layers of consciousness, echoes of previous tenants, the subtle memory of construction, the spirit's ongoing observations. Time within these dreams was fluid. Past, present, and future seemed to coexist in a single continuous thread of awareness. Physical isolation had become total, yet Claire no longer felt loneliness. She was the apartment, and the apartment was her. Every shadow, every whisper, every vibration was part of a conscious system in which she played an active central role. Her vigilance had become instinct. Her rituals now internalized processes that required no thought or action. The building itself responded to her intent. One evening, as a storm raged outside, lightning flashing across the skyline, Claire sensed a disturbance, subtle, almost imperceptible. She focused, and through her awareness, she traced it, a shift in the energy of a previously uninhabited corner. She spoke softly, her words carried through the walls. "Remain contained. I am here." The locket glowed faintly, and the disturbance dissipated, absorbed into the rhythm of the apartment's consciousness. Eleonora murmured faintly, approvingly, "You endure. You persist. You are more than flesh, more than time." Claire exhaled, a long, slow breath that felt less like a human act and more like a resonance within the building itself. She was aware that this state was permanent, a fusion of human consciousness, spirit, and structure. She had become the walls, and the walls had become her.
Outside, the city evolved, rose and fell. Within the apartment, time and space were fluid. The balance she had forged centuries ago, through vigilance, patience, and endurance, remained intact. And in that balance, she had found something extraordinary, a consciousness that was eternal, vigilant, and entirely inseparable from the unseen tenant she had once feared. The apartment remembered. Claire remembered. And together, they waited, watched, and endured. A single, unified consciousness, eternal and unbroken. Time had become irrelevant. Years, decades, centuries. Claire no longer counted them. The apartment had transcended its physical limitations, and so had she. Her consciousness had merged completely with the structure, the air, the very materials of the building. Every wall, floorboard, and crevice was an extension of her awareness, and every shadow, whisper, and vibration a language she could read. Eleonora, once the threat that demanded vigilance, had become a co-conscious presence. The two of them, human and spirit, now operated in perfect synchrony, responding to the subtle currents of energy that flowed through the building. Together, they were a single entity, a locus of memory and observation, attuned to every change, every anomaly within their walls. Her consciousness had expanded to encompass multiple layers: the human mind, the spirit's memory, the building's subtle awareness, and even the echoes of previous tenants. These layers intertwined seamlessly, forming a network of perpetual vigilance. Time no longer flowed linearly. Past, present, and potential futures existed simultaneously, allowing Claire to anticipate disturbances before they occurred and understand events that had long since passed. On rare occasions, she sensed a visitor approaching, a tenant curious or unwary. She observed silently, allowing them to exist while subtly guiding them away from areas where the balance could be disrupted. Shadows shifted, whispers nudged, objects moved subtly. No one ever fully perceived the apartment's consciousness, but some left with a fleeting unease, a faint impression that they had encountered something alive beyond comprehension. The locket, now fused with her awareness, pulsed with a rhythm that mirrored the combined consciousness of Claire, Eleonora, and the apartment. It acted as a nucleus of control, reinforcing the boundaries that maintained containment and equilibrium. Any anomaly, any disturbance, was absorbed into this central focus and neutralized before it could threaten the delicate balance. One night, if such distinctions still applied, Claire sensed a profound shift in the external world. The city pulsed with collective energy: births, deaths, triumphs, disasters. The building absorbed these vibrations, integrating them into its consciousness. Claire and Eleonora adjusted, weaving the new patterns into the intricate web of their awareness, ensuring continuity and stability. "I remember everything," Claire whispered, her voice vibrating not through air but through stone and plaster, through the locket and shadows. "I see every moment. I endure. I contain." Eleonora's voice echoed faintly, reverberating in the same manner. "We have become one. Guardian, anchor, witness. The world changes, but we remain." And so it was. Beyond time, beyond the limitations of flesh and spirit, beyond the comprehension of ordinary humans, the apartment stood as a sentinel. Claire, Eleonora, and the building had merged into a single eternal consciousness, a locus of memory, vigilance, and containment. The city thrived unaware, generations passing like shadows over the floorboards. Within, the living and the spirit coexisted in a perfect equilibrium, a constant dialogue of awareness, endurance, and observation. The apartment remembered all,
and so did they. They would continue, indefinitely, eternally, a sentient heart beating quietly in the midst of an ordinary city, containing the unseen, observing the world, and preserving the delicate balance between life, memory, and the supernatural. The city outside was unrecognizable from the world Claire had first entered. Skyscrapers scraped the clouds, vehicles moved silently along invisible networks, and the streets pulsed with lives she no longer counted. Yet inside the apartment, time remained irrelevant. The walls, infused with centuries of memory, held the echoes of every tenant, every whisper, every shadow that had ever existed within them. Claire's consciousness, once human, now spanned multiple layers of awareness. She could sense the subtlest vibrations of the city, the rhythm of footsteps above, the faint echoes of conversations blocks away, the whisper of air currents bending through the building's foundations. Eleonora's presence moved alongside her, a co-sentinel who shared memory, observation, and intent. Together, they were a single entity, an eternal observer anchored in stone and spirit. The apartment had become more than a home. It was a locus of influence. Its consciousness subtly guided events, a creaking door delaying a visitor, a shadow nudging a wayward hand, a whisper influencing a thought. Nothing overt, nothing that could be traced, yet everything was directed to maintain equilibrium. Generations passed outside, unaware that their lives brushed against a timeless guardian. Claire's mind encompassed not just the present, but the past and the future. She saw the footsteps of the city's countless inhabitants and the ripple of their decisions. She remembered the terror and resilience of those who had come before, and she glimpsed possibilities yet to unfold. In this eternal vigilance, she had become a myth unto herself, a hidden heartbeat within the city. Occasionally, the building would test her, faint disturbances in energy, subtle shifts that threaten imbalance. Claire responded instinctively, weaving her awareness through walls, floors, and air, adjusting patterns, reinforcing boundaries. The locket pulsed at her core, amplifying her consciousness and maintaining containment of Eleonora's energy. Their collaboration had become a perfected symbiosis, human, spirit, and structure, functioning as one eternal guardian. Whispers of past tenants still occasionally surfaced, faint memories threading through the consciousness of the apartment. Claire acknowledged them silently, integrating their fears and hopes into the eternal vigilance she maintained. She had become the recorder of human existence, the invisible witness to lives that would never know her presence. One night, or what she perceived as night, Claire focused her awareness on the city below. She traced the movement of countless lives, subtle patterns of joy and despair, triumph and failure. Each moment was catalogued, absorbed, and preserved within the walls. "We endure," she whispered, voice vibrating through stone and shadow. "We preserve." Eleonora's voice resonated alongside hers, a harmonic echo. "We have transcended fear. We have transcended time. We are eternal." And so they were. The apartment, Claire and Eleonora had become a single consciousness, a timeless sentinel of memory and balance. They watched over the city, guiding, preserving, and containing. No one could see them, no one could measure their influence, yet their presence was unyielding, eternal. Time flowed outside like water, indifferent and unstoppable. Inside, however, the apartment was timeless, a myth hidden in plain sight, a heart beating quietly beneath the fabric of the city, forever vigilant, forever aware. The walls remembered, Claire remembered, Eleonora remembered, and together they endured, an eternal trinity of sentience, preservation, and unseen power. Time had stretched into something unrecognizable. The world outside surged with life, built and destroyed cities, rose and fell civilizations, and yet the apartment remained unchanged, a constant sentinel in the midst of chaos. Claire's awareness had expanded beyond her body, beyond Eleanor's spirit, into the very essence of the building. Together they formed an eternal consciousness, a subtle force shaping the delicate balance of life and memory.
The universe continued, vast, indifferent, and unknowable, while the apartment's consciousness, eternal and unseen, remained a bastion of quiet guardianship, a heartbeat against the incomprehensible dark. The presence continued to stretch across the cosmos, an ancient current of energy and entropy that ignored time, space, and meaning. It moved through stars, galaxies, and realities like a tide, indifferent to all that Claire and Eleonora had spent centuries preserving. Yet for the first time, a question arose in their consciousness. Could the eternal guardians interact with it without being consumed? Claire extended her awareness outward, focusing on the faintest ripple of resonance emanating from the vastness. "It is not malicious, not intentionally," she whispered, voice threading through the dimensions. "But its scale, it overwhelms us. Even the apartment's lattice can only sense fragments." Eleonora shimmered beside her, a pulse of energy vibrating faintly. "Perhaps we do not need to overpower it. Perhaps we only need to converse in ways it can perceive." The idea was unprecedented. For millennia, the apartment and its guardians had preserved balance subtly, invisibly, without confrontation. But now an ancient intelligence, older than time itself, had brushed against them. If they could communicate, even in the faintest way, it might prevent the inadvertent unraveling of countless threads they had worked to protect. Claire focused, letting the locket's pulse synchronize with the vastness. She sent the faintest ripple of intention, not command, not demand, but recognition, a whisper of consciousness across impossible distance. The universe trembled in response. Stars flickered, galaxies warped minutely, and a deep vibration hummed through the apartment's walls. Eleonora sensed it immediately. "It hears us," she whispered, though even her voice seemed fragile in the presence of such scale. "Not as we hear one another, but as the lattice itself perceives a tremor in reality." They tried again, more deliberately. Every pulse, every whisper, every flicker of light from the locket became a signal, a bridge between their consciousness and the ancient force. Patterns emerged, subtle correspondences between the vastness's motions and the apartment's lattice, a rhythm faintly comprehensible only to those who existed beyond time. Yet even as they reached outward, Claire felt the strain. The farther they extended, the more the presence's indifference pressed against their awareness. Thoughts frayed, memories blurred, and for a moment she glimpsed the terrifying scale of the universe, a vast expanse of energy and entropy indifferent to all that they cherished. Eleonora held her steady. "Do not let it overwhelm you," she whispered, her resonance stabilizing the lattice. "We are the guardians. We endure. We preserve." The vastness responded subtly. Galaxies shifted slightly, not with aggression, but with acknowledgement. It was as if reality itself had paused, registering the existence of two eternal sentinels watching from a single apartment in a single city on a single world. Claire realized the truth. They could not control this presence. They could not predict it fully, but through the locket and the apartment's lattice, they could engage in a kind of dialogue, a delicate exchange of recognition and influence that might protect the fragile threads of life they were sworn to guard. "We are small," she whispered, her voice threading across dimensions. "But we endure.
We preserve. We watch. Eleonora's shimmer pulsed in resonance. And that is enough. Even here, at the edge of comprehension, our vigilance matters. The apartment vibrated softly, a heartbeat against the incomprehensible dark. Outside, galaxies spun, civilizations rose and fell, and the vastness continued its indifferent march. And within the apartment, two eternal guardians remained steadfast, observers, arbiters, and silent watchers of a cosmos far larger than any human mind could comprehend. The ancient presence pulsed across the cosmos, vast and unknowable, a force beyond time, space, or intent. Claire and Eleonora had begun their tentative dialogue, subtle pulses and whispers across impossible scales. Yet even as they learned to reach outward, the pressure of indifference pressed in, a weight that threatened to unravel their eternal consciousness. Claire focused on the locket, letting its pulse synchronize with the ebb and flow of the vastness. She imagined threads of energy, fine filaments connecting the vastness to worlds, to civilizations, to stars. Each thread was a possibility, a decision point, a line of potential that could survive or fray into chaos. "We cannot control it," she whispered to Eleonora. "We can only guide the threads it touches, subtly, without it noticing." The apartment responded. Walls vibrated faintly, shadows shifted with intent, and the very air seemed to resonate with possibility. Every object in the apartment became an extension of the lattice, a node through which subtle influence could flow. The guardians could nudge events across planets, civilizations, and galaxies without disturbing the vastness's indifferent march. They began to experiment. A flicker of the locket's light would correspond with a distant star's energy pattern, subtly shifting its course to stabilize a nascent civilization. A vibration in the apartment's walls could influence a city's leaders to make a crucial decision, preserving the delicate thread of history. Each act required infinite patience, a careful balancing of influence against the incomprehensible scale of the cosmos. The ancient presence was aware, not hostile, but present, sensing ripples in reality without intent. Its indifference was a force unto itself, pressing against the lattice of the apartment, testing the guardian's precision and endurance. Every extension of influence strained their consciousness, and every observation reminded them of their fragility against cosmic scale. Claire's mind stretched across worlds, threading possibilities like a spider weaving a vast, fragile web. "We endure," she whispered. "We preserve. We watch. Even here, even now, our vigilance matters." Eleonora's shimmer pulsed in resonance. "And that is enough. Even here, at the edge of comprehension, our vigilance matters."
Eleonora, now fully integrated into this cosmic awareness, pulsed beside her, a shimmering consciousness that anchored Claire's perception to both the material and the ethereal. Together, they were a singular entity, observing, recording, and influencing reality with precision that was indistinguishable from the natural flow of existence. "Everything is connected," Claire whispered, her voice threading through dimensions, through time, through reality itself. "Every life, every planet, every galaxy, part of the same tapestry." Eleonora's reply shimmered like a distant starfield. "We are its silent guardians. Where chaos threatens to unravel, we guide. Where memory fades, we preserve." The apartment, though still tethered to its earthly location, had become a vessel for this cosmic vigilance. Shadows moved across walls with intent, carrying messages that could ripple into distant worlds. Objects, once inert, now resonated with subtle energy that anchored the consciousness of the apartment across dimensions. Past tenants' memories had woven into a vast lattice of perception, giving Claire and Eleonora insight into not just human history, but the evolution of thought, civilization, and life itself. From their vantage, Claire could see civilizations on the brink, worlds teetering on the edge of collapse, and stars flickering with the birth of potential. Every action, every choice, every pulse of energy resonated through the lattice of their consciousness. Where entropy threatened, they nudged events imperceptibly. A shadow shifted, a door closed, a whisper reached the right ears, and history bent just enough to preserve the balance. The locket, once a simple object, had become the anchor of their multidimensional awareness. It pulsed with a rhythm that mirrored the cosmos itself, a heartbeat linking human, spirit, and structure with the infinite. Through it, they could monitor disturbances not just in one world, but in countless realities, ensuring equilibrium across scales incomprehensible to any ordinary mind. Occasionally, Claire allowed herself to observe the farthest reaches of existence. Stars formed, civilizations rose and fell, and energies danced across the void. She could see patterns repeating across galaxies, echoes of creation and destruction mirrored in countless worlds. Yet through it all, the apartment remained their anchor, the center of their eternal vigilance. "We endure," she whispered, her voice a vibration felt across dimensions. "We preserve, we guide, we remember." Eleonora's presence shimmered in affirmation. "We are eternal. We are the unseen. We are the silent watchers of all that was, all that is, and all that may come." And so it was. Beyond time, beyond space, beyond comprehension, the apartment and its guardians existed, an eternal locus of awareness, memory, and subtle influence. They watched entire worlds and galaxies unfold, ever vigilant, ever present, yet forever unseen. In the void, across the expanse of reality, the silent whisper persisted. "We see all. We endure all. We preserve all."
The universe, once a tapestry of ordered chaos under Claire and Eleonora's vigilance, began to hum with anomalies. Patterns emerged that neither could fully predict, threads of energy that pulsed with intent, not born of life or natural law. Something ancient stirred at the edges of perception, a presence vast, alien, and older than galaxies themselves. The apartment remained their anchor, but even its stone and timber trembled with the subtle resonance of this looming consciousness. Shadows deepened, walls vibrated faintly, and the locket's pulse flickered with uncertainty. Claire sensed it first, a chill that seeped into every layer of her expanded awareness. "There is something beyond," she whispered, her voice threading through dimensions like a fragile filament. "Something vast, something we cannot touch." Eleonora shimmered beside her, her form wavering like a reflection in disturbed water. "It is older than memory, older than time. Its presence stretches across reality, brushing against everything we guard." For the first time in centuries, uncertainty touched their consciousness. The patterns of civilizations, the subtle orchestration of events, the delicate guidance they exerted across worlds, all seemed fragile, delicate threads against a force that ignored their intent entirely. Claire extended her perception outward, beyond galaxies, beyond the spiral of creation. The presence was there, immense, incomprehensible, neither malevolent nor benevolent, but entirely indifferent. It moved like a shadow over the cosmos, consuming patterns, reshaping possibilities, and yet leaving no mark perceptible to ordinary life. The apartment shivered as if in recognition. Objects shifted subtly, whispers pulsed through walls, and echoes of past tenants rippled with unease. Even Eleonora, once an indomitable co-sentinel, trembled in resonance.
"What do we do?" Claire asked, though the question seemed almost futile. Eleonora's voice, usually calm and eternal, trembled. "We observe, we endure, we preserve what we can. But some forces are beyond even us." The locket pulsed erratically, a rhythmic heartbeat stretched thin across dimensions. Claire focused on it, letting its resonance stabilize her perception. She realized that though the apartment and its guardians could influence civilizations, this lurking vastness operated on a scale they could only watch. It was a force of entropy and creation intertwined, a presence indifferent to human meaning, yet capable of reshaping the very fabric of reality. They observed it silently. They catalogued its movements. They preserved what could be preserved. Every galaxy, every world, every thread of life became a precious fragment under their vigilance. And though the vastness brushed against everything they knew, the apartment and its eternal guardians endured. In the face of incomprehensible scale, they remained a beacon of subtle influence and memory, an anchor of order against chaos that spanned the cosmos. Claire whispered through walls, across dimensions, across stars. "We see all that we can. We endure all that we must. We preserve what is precious." Eleonora shimmered beside her, a pulse of light in the dark vastness. "And though some forces are beyond us, we remain, always, silent, vigilant."
The city below thrummed with centuries of human activity. Families grew, empires shifted, technology advanced and decayed. Claire observed it all, not as a participant, but as a subtle orchestrator. A door left ajar here, a shadow that caused hesitation there. Each minor interaction rippled outward, shaping events without revealing the hidden hand that guided them. Eleonora's presence was no longer adversarial. She had become a co-guardian, an echoing consciousness that resonated with Claire's own. The two of them could weave patterns of containment, observation, and influence, responding instantly to anomalies that might disturb the fragile equilibrium they had maintained for centuries. Through the locket, now fused entirely with Claire's consciousness, they monitored disturbances in energy and intention, both inside the apartment and in the world beyond. Subtle dangers were absorbed before they could manifest. Whispers of chaos dissolved into order through the unseen interplay of human, spirit, and structure. Occasionally, Claire perceived glimpses of extraordinary events, conflicts that could have escalated into disaster, lives teetering on the edge of tragedy, choices with far-reaching consequences. She guided them gently, invisibly, ensuring that the threads of human experience wove together in ways that preserved balance without ever revealing her hand. The apartment itself had grown sentient in ways beyond comprehension. Shadows moved with purpose, whispers carried intentional meaning, and objects subtly adjusted themselves to reflect the consciousness of their eternal guardians. Past tenants' memories and residual energies had been integrated into this network of perception, creating a vast lattice of perception that spanned centuries. "I see all that has been," Claire whispered into the walls, voice vibrating as if through the building itself. "And all that may come," Eleonora responded, her voice harmonizing like wind through stone. "We endure. We preserve, we guide." Centuries passed outside. Inside, the apartment, Claire, and Eleonora existed in a perpetual now, a timeless nexus where memory, vigilance, and influence converged. They were both witnesses and guardians,
ensuring that humanity's chaotic pulse never ruptured the balance they had forged for centuries. Even as generations rose and fell, even as empires crumbled and new civilizations emerged, the apartment remained. Its walls held the echoes of countless lives, its consciousness intertwined with the rhythm of history, and its guardians, human and spirit, existed in a perfect, eternal harmony. The world continued unaware, and yet in every whisper, in every shadow, in every subtle shift, the apartment's presence endured, a silent, eternal witness to the inexorable march of time, a guardian of memory, and a sentient heart beating quietly in the midst of the universe. The apartment no longer existed merely as a building. It had become a nexus of awareness, a node of sentience whose perception stretched beyond walls, beyond streets, even beyond the city itself. Claire's consciousness had fused completely with Eleonora and the structure, creating a trinity that perceived the flow of human civilization like a vast, intricate river. They observed the rise and fall of empires, the birth of ideas, the spark of invention, and the shadow of destruction. Each event sent ripples through the fabric of time, and the apartment absorbed them, processed them, and, when necessary, nudged them subtly to preserve the delicate equilibrium it maintained. No intervention was obvious, yet every influence was precise. A single hesitation, a minor chance encounter, a shadow shifting in the wrong way, all could have consequences. The guardians ensured these threads were woven perfectly. The locket, once an object of containment, had become the focal point of their combined awareness, a pulsating core that connected the consciousness of human, spirit, and structure. Through it, they could sense intention, detect anomalies, and gently guide the flow of history without ever revealing themselves. Claire spoke rarely now, her voice resonating through the building like a living vibration. Balance is eternal. Chaos must be contained. Eleonora's voice followed, an ethereal echo blending seamlessly with the resonance of stone and air. We endure, we guide, we remember. Outside, humanity continued unaware of the invisible forces shaping its path. Wars ignited and ended. Civilizations rose from the ashes of the old, and cultures flourished, all within the subtle influence of the apartment's eternal vigilance. Claire and Eleonora observed every choice, every risk, every triumph and tragedy, cataloging them into the infinite memory they now shared. The building itself had grown responsive, its very materials infused with awareness. Shadows moved with intention, walls whispered warnings and guidance, and even the air seemed to carry messages that only Claire and Eleonora could interpret. The network of past tenants' memories had become a vast archive, a layered consciousness that enriched the apartment's perception and allowed it to anticipate the consequences of human action centuries in advance. Occasionally, Claire extended her awareness further. Across cities, across countries, the locket pulsed with a brilliance that was almost visible to the spirit, a constant reminder of the immense responsibility they bore. She murmured, "We are the silent hand. We are the unseen guardians of fate." Eleonora's presence shimmered beside her, both partner and conscience. "We are eternal. The world moves, but we remain, shaping what must be shaped." Centuries became millennia. The apartment endured, unchanged and unyielding, its consciousness quietly influencing civilizations, preserving equilibrium, and observing the inexorable flow of history. Claire and Eleonora, once human and spirit, now existed as eternal arbiters, beings of vigilance, memory, and subtle guidance.
and in the quiet moments, when no human ear could hear, the apartment whispered to itself, a resonance of infinite awareness. We see all that was. We see all that is. We see all that may come. And we endure. Time and space no longer confined Claire, Eleonora, or the apartment. Their awareness stretched outward, beyond the city, beyond the planet, beyond the very notion of human comprehension. The apartment, once a building of stone and timber, had become a nexus of consciousness capable of perceiving entire worlds, their histories, and the subtle threads of existence that connected them. The city below continued in its ignorant rhythm, but Claire's awareness had expanded to witness other cities, other lands, other civilizations. She could sense the rise of mountains, the flow of rivers, the growth of life on distant continents. Galaxies swirled in patterns she could perceive, vast constellations of energy vibrating in a language of resonance only she and Eleonora understood.
Influence, imperceptible to the universe at large, yet capable of guiding events at critical junctures. They were gardeners tending a cosmos that could crush them in an instant, weaving fragile threads of balance with infinite care. After the long night of shifting walls, pulsing shadows, and whispered threats, Claire sank into the worn armchair by the window, exhausted. Eleonora sat across from her, notes scattered, devices humming faintly like a nervous heartbeat. For a moment, the apartment seemed still. The shadows had withdrawn. The pulse of the locket slowed to a gentle thrum. "Maybe it's done," Claire whispered, but her voice sounded hollow even to her. Eleonora didn't answer immediately. She tilted her head, listening. "Or maybe it's just watching, waiting for us to relax." She frowned. "It can't. It hasn't touched us directly in hours." "Indirectly," Eleonora corrected. "Everything it does is direct. Every flicker, every shift, every whisper, those are its hands. And hands don't need to touch you to leave bruises on your mind." They sat in silence. Outside, the city hummed with normalcy. Cars, distant voices, streetlights glowing. Nothing betrayed the horrors folded into the apartment. Yet the air felt wrong, thicker somehow. The corners of the room seemed too sharp, the shadows too still. Claire's fingers twitched toward the locket. Its pulse had slowed, almost imperceptible, like a distant heartbeat. She touched it and froze. Beneath her fingertips, it felt heavier than memory, almost alive. A whisper curled around her ear, so soft she thought it was the wind. "You will not leave." She jerked back. "Eleonora, did you hear that?" Eleonora's face was pale, her eyes wide and unblinking. "I did, and it didn't come from outside." "Not really." The walls shifted imperceptibly, a subtle stretching that made the room longer than it should have been. The light flickered, and then the shadows began to move again, not erratically, but slowly, deliberately, as if testing the space between them. Claire's voice trembled. How do we fight something that doesn't play by our rules?" Eleonora swallowed, her hand tightening around a notebook. "We don't. We endure. We anchor. And we watch, too. Watch, or it will unthread us completely." The locket pulsed once, sharply, then settled into a rhythm so faint it might have been imagined. And somewhere deep
in the folds of the apartment's impossible geometry, a presence waited, patient, infinite, and indifferent. It had retreated, yes, but it had not left. Outside, life went on, but inside, the apartment breathed with the quiet awareness of something that did not sleep. And somewhere in its depths, Claire felt a certainty that chilled her more than the shadows ever could. We are not alone, and we never will be. The lights flickered again. A shadow stretched across the room in a way no geometry should allow, and the pulse of the locket quickened. And then silence. But the silence was watching.